This is Trial Transcripts Exposed by Crime in Court with Heather. Raw courtroom reads with my commentary. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crime in Court with Heather. This is Trial Transcripts Exposed, and we are reading through the Menendez brothers retrial. And today we are on the defense's case, part 82, which means we have 10 parts left of the defense's case. We are getting closer to the end here. And soon we will be getting to the state's rebuttal. So with that said, let's just get started here. Let me first thank my founding justice insiders. So that would be Toyota Girl 67, SLB 29488. May the Force be with you 4313. Jessica Wienand 6079, Mrs. Apples 2007, Butler 89833, Brooke JF, Jen P 773, Boom Chickawawa 1, Kendall B 5757, Carly O 0406, O Ashley 83, True Crime Debates, Sandy South 5706, Chickenhead 33, Nicotio Nirotini, That's So Nelly, Julie E 6770, 1-800-FRAUDBUSTERS, Bezo Jones, and Hannah Bandana are all founding justice insiders. Thank you for your support. I also want to thank my justice insiders, Lainey Jane 91, Couch Potato Pro, and Tech Vibe 42. Thank you all for being members. All right, so let us get started with our transcript here. So today is the day that we're going to be reading is Wednesday, January 24th, and we are in the year of 1996. So it looks like we are starting the morning with no jury so far, and there's going to be a few arguments outside the presence of the jury. The court says in the trial, the defendants are here. The jury is not. I believe there are some matters you want to talk about. Mr. Levin says, I have one very brief matter, Your Honor. With respect to the demonstration tape of the Lyle Menendez testimony that we previously discussed, I talked to the people who will be performing the in-court demonstration. Remember, they're not letting him watch the video, which is so stupid because the video shows demeanor, shows the actual witness on the witness stand, but they want, instead, the state objected to that for whatever reason, and they want it read. They want the transcript read back from Lyle's testimony from trial one. So he says, for the in-court demonstration, and they ask, if possible, to do it in court on Tuesday the 30th. That's when they're they're most available, and they have to bring equipment in. So I would need to tell them what time. Perhaps we could do it at 8:30. The court says, how long will it take? Mr. Levin says, just a few minutes. I won't expect longer than 5 or 10 minutes, maybe even shorter. Okay, this is really annoying. My computer's being really slow. I just updated it, but yeah, it's still being really slow. And scrolling, it's like lagging as I'm trying to scroll and read at the same time. This might be a problem because I have to scroll and read. So let's see if it catches up at all. This is really frustrating. Sorry. Mr. Levin says 5 or 10 minutes, maybe even shorter than that. We just have to set it up so that we could demonstrate it to you. The court says, and is there something that can be provided to the prosecution ahead of time so they know what it is that they can see it or that they can see it? Mr. Levin says, certainly. I think we can provide that. I can notify the people who have set it up and give Mr. Khan and Ms. Nahara the opportunity to go there and view it, like I will. The company is TPT on Washington Boulevard, and I can just tell them that we authorized them to show it to the prosecution if they so desire. Ms. Abramson says, we should indicate for the record we will turn over the edited videotapes to the prosecution of all of Lyle Menendez's testimony, whatever was edited, 4 volumes, 4 tapes. The court says, okay, that was material that you had edited ahead of time. Ms. Abramson says, we edited out the fadeaways. Remember the court, we talked about this. The court says, that's all been edited out, material of the prosecution or materials related to the tape where the defendant wasn't depicted. Ms. Towery says, also, Your Honor, objections that were sustained, anything that would be eliminated if the reporter were reading from the transcript was eliminated from the videotape. Ms. Abramson, that was Ms. Towery. Ms. Abramson says, but it didn't take out specific portions of the testimony. Ms. Towery says, no, that hasn't been ruled on. The court says, then tentatively 8:30. Mr. Levin says, thank you. So they're going to bring in this edited tape. They're going to view it on the 30th of January for them. So this is January 24th. So in about 6 days from now, but in the past, if that makes sense. The court says, so what else do you want to talk about? Mr. Khan says, there was an objection yesterday to my inquiry of the witness concerning the fact that Ann Burgess previously attempted to diagnose the defendant and concluded that he was not suffering from any mental disorder whatsoever and so testified in the first trial. The court says, and there was an objection to that? Mr. Khan says, yes. Ms. Abramson says, yes. First of all, that misstates her testimony. She testified she was not asked to diagnose. And then she was asked if he suffered from any disease, defect, or disorder. And at the time, she said no. But at the 801 hearing, she indicated that under the definitions in the DSM-IV, she would and did diagnose him as having PTSD. So my position is if the people are allowed to elicit, first of all, the witness doesn't rely upon that statement of Dr. Burgess from the first trial. But if the people are permitted to elicit it, then my position is I should be allowed to elicit what she testified to in the 801 hearing. Makes perfect sense to me. And beyond that, I would be entitled to elicit those portions of her previous testimony from the trial that he does rely upon, such as her opinion that my client was acting from in a panic state, overwhelming sense of fear at the time of the homicides, and what it was in that last week that would have produced that level of fear, such as her testimony concerning the neurobiology of fear and other things that she testified to. I think it's important for the people to go in and pick out one answer from a witness who testified for 4 days, or improper, I'm sorry. I think it's improper for the people to go and pick one answer from a witness who testified for 4 days to make it seem as if there is a conflict in the opinions between these two experts when there isn't any, unless I am permitted to go into all the materials, all the things that she said that he agrees with. So I just think it's a slippery slope. The court says, what is the people's response? Mr. Khan says, I intend to argue the witness about one material, or to ask the witness, I intend to ask the witness about one matter fact. Nope, strike that. Let me say that again. Mr. Khan says, I intend to ask the witness about one matter only, and that is the diagnosis. That did the fact that the defendant was previously evaluated by Dr. Ann Burgess, having spent 50 hours with the defendant, and after those 50 hours concluded that he was not suffering from any disease or disorder at the time of the commission of the crime. That was her testimony from the trial. Now, that's all I intend to get into. Counsel is incorrect in saying that. Therefore, if I ask that question, and then we throw out the evidence code and counsel can then get into anything that she wants to get into, that simply doesn't follow. If the witness wants to explain why, in spite of the prior diagnosis or lack of a diagnosis, he still holds the opinion that the defendant suffered from PTSD, then I think He can do so. And in fact, I think it follows, and I would not object to a reference to the fact that Ann Burgess has now changed her opinion and gotten on board with Dr. Wilson, and she testified in the 801 hearing. I think that that is the proper rebuttal for the specific area that I am getting into. If I am getting into the specific area, the proper rebuttal should be so limited to the fact that since she now says she is of the opinion that the defendant suffers from PTSD, he is satisfied with his diagnosis. That's the only rebuttal that follows. Counsel is incorrect in suggesting that it opens the door to everything and anything she wants to get into. Abramson says, well, for one thing, what counsel is trying to do is use one answer to a question that Dr. Burgess gave at the previous trial as impeachment material of the witness, which it isn't. He has not indicated that he ruled or that he relied on that answer. In fact, we turned over to the people the materials he relied upon. He specifically designated that with respect to Dr. Burgess, he is only relying on her to the extent of her modified opinion given at the 801 hearing. So he's not even relying on her testimony from the trial. And she says, so I think it's improper to do that. The court says he can't play games on that one, that he is relying on one portion of her testimony and not another. That doesn't make sense. Ms. Abramson says, well, he disagrees with what she said at the trial. The court says, well, the people certainly, and it's clear that the people have the right to confront the expert with another expert's diagnosis and ask whether that would change or not. But he can't even diagnose or talk about diagnosis here on the witness stand. Like, he's limited in even talking about other witness or other experts. But now the court is saying, yeah, sure, you can look at other experts. What? He hasn't been able to talk about experts during their direct examination. She was trying to get him to reference other experts' opinions, and it kept getting objected to. Now the court's like, sure, the state should be able to ask anything about other experts' diagnosis. Like, what is that? Such BS. This judge sucks. Ms. Abramson says, except there was no diagnosis. She was never asked to render a diagnosis, Ms. Burgess, or Dr. Burgess. The court says, I haven't finished my thoughts here. Ms. Abramson says, I'm sorry. The court says, my concern is how the people intend to prove that she didn't have a diagnosis. Assuming you ask the question, what are you going to do to prove it up? They haven't called her as an expert witness. Mr. Khan says, from the testimony at the trial, the testimony that was given, question, did you ever diagnose Erik Menendez as having any kind of mental disorder or mental disease? Answer, no, I did not. Question, and in fact, he does not have such mental disorders or disease. Is that correct? Answer, that is my opinion, yes. Question, but it's your opinion that he had some sort of condition similar to PTSD. Is that correct? Answer, no, not necessarily. That we were talking more about the fear response. I did not give a diagnosis of what you just said. Question, all right. So you didn't diagnose him with any kind of disorder or defect or disease. Is that correct? Answer, that's correct. The court says this is from what hearing? Mr. Khan says this is from the trial, from the first trial, and Dr. Wilson testified that he reviewed all of her testimony from the first trial. The court says, all right. And then the defense says they're entitled to bring out the fact that she described the underlying conditions that are consistent with those of Dr. Wilson, that the thrust of her testimony was identical except for the use of the word for the diagnosis. Mr. Khan says, I don't think that they can just characterize her entire 4 days of testimony as identical. The court says, well, cannot the witness say, yes, in my opinion, the balance of her testimony supports my opinion, and this is why I think so, and then describe all it is that she said that supports his opinion. Once you get into exposure to material, the detail of hearsay material, then they're entitled to explore it in greater depth than just the restrictive approach that you take. That the witness can only say yes or no, and that's it. He could go further and explain why it is that he believes that her opinion is consistent. not just the diagnosis or lack of diagnosis, but the underlying opinions that she expressed that were consistent with his current testimony. So when you're getting in through the witness what she said in the first trial and going beyond the purpose for which you want to impeach him by getting in the corroborative aspects of her testimony, which is really what occurred. That's how I look at it. Clearly, you're entitled to impeach an expert with a diagnosis that is different than his, but he is entitled to explain why that diagnosis in her testimony is not different than his, because a diagnosis is not just a label, it's an opinion about a person's condition. Ugh. So I think her testimony would be open to disclosure to the jury through his opinion. Are you kidding? This judge is like, whatever the state wants, pretty much, I'm going to give it to them, whether it's appropriate or not. Mr. Khan says, okay. The court says, so if you want to ask the question, then he is entitled to bring out why he thinks her testimony was consistent. Anything else before we proceed? Ms. Abramson says, there is only one other matter, Your Honor. Since the jury is not here yet, I am taking the time. We have been requesting now for some time from the prosecution information concerning what materials they have submitted thus far to Dr. Dietz. Dr. Dietz is the doctor who is going to be doing the mental health evaluation of Erik now that he's concluded his testimony. The court is allowing the state to do an exam of Erik Menendez even before their rebuttal or whatever, so that they can have some results. It's kind of strange that you would do this mid-trial, but court's allowing it. The court just says, let's get the jury here. He doesn't want to talk about Dr. Dietz. Every time she brings it up, no. Ms. Aronson says, we think we are entitled to know under the appropriate case authority, but most important, under concepts of Brady, since this is the prosecution's expert, what was submitted to Dr. Dietz before he has his interview with my client. First of all, so that we have a timeline record of it, and we also should be entitled to know if he has any preliminary opinions at this point, so we can properly address cross-examining him based on what he knew and when he knew it, what he knew and when he knew it. Beyond that, we want to submit materials to him if the people are only, what our concern is the people will submit that they want him to see, what they want him to see, and omit everything that might be contrary to the opinion that the people are seeking to have him come in. So everything that's contrary to, the boys having a mental health, anything, they're going to try to eliminate it from coming into his review material. And then hide behind the what did he rely on rule and foreclose us from ever demonstrating to this jury that they have purposely withheld Brady type material from the expert. So I don't think that it invades anything for us. I am not even asking to see it. I just want to know what they submitted to him. I have a package that I have prepared to send, but if he hasn't even been given the transcripts, for example, from the trial or the first trial, if he hasn't been given the voluminous records, I want to make sure that I get those to him. So I am requesting information about what they have submitted to him. The court says, okay, what's the people's response? Ms. Nahara says, thank you, Your Honor. Our position is under the current rules of discovery, they are entitled to know everything he relied upon when he formed his opinion. The problem with counsel's request is that he has not yet formed an opinion because he has not yet had an opportunity to examine the defendant. So you're making it so that they can't ask for discovery, basically, because he hasn't done it yet. So as I told her earlier, until he examines the defendant, which he will do on Saturday, which he will do on Saturday, and sometime after that, form an opinion, and then whatever he uses from what we gave him as a basis for that opinion is what we will turn over in discovery. She states that she requires all that we have given him under Brady, And I believe there is no such provision in Brady that provides for that. Brady merely provides that all exculpatory material in the hands of the prosecution be turned over to the defense, and that has been done. So in this case, I think counsel's request is premature. I think what she is requesting is what we had requested and what the court said we are not entitled to, and they are also not entitled to, and that is everything that's been turned over to this point. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, that is different. First of all, I am not seeking to see it. Second of all, the people don't have a right to absolutely put on an expert. It had to do with the fact that we put on mental state and they have to deal with it on rebuttal. The rules are not exactly parallel. Moreover, I can tell the court that we're going to have some very serious time problems dealing with Dr. Dietz. As the court knows, my client has been available since the end of the cross examination to be examined by Dr. Dietz. He is available for the long weekend. Dr. Dietz was not available. We never had an explanation of why. My client was again available and prepared to cooperate for last weekend, and what we heard was that the people had failed to turn over certain materials to Dr. Dietz that he wanted in advance. We still don't know what those were. So last week, again, goes out. Now we are at this weekend. We may rest our case next week, depending on the court's rulings on certain witnesses, and I am not, and we will have 16 hours of videotape plus a report. The court says, May I suggest this? I agree with the prosecution until, he gets into it. It's premature to have disclosures of materials because, as I said before, we don't know if he's going to testify, and the issues are different if he doesn't. Ms. Abramson says, He will testify. The court says, I really don't know if he will or not. Maybe they will even abandon their interview once the cross examination of Dr. Wilson is completed. I really don't know. I have no idea. You can't just speculate things out of thin air that he's going to cancel it. Like, what? If it's scheduled, you should assume it's supposed to take place. But what she's saying is they had Erik ready, prepared for 2 weekends in a row, and their guy didn't show up. They were canceled on. I only deal with things that are currently before me without trying to anticipate all the machinations of counsel and things that might arise here and both sides on the table. I have no idea what's going to happen. I can guess and I can try to guess, but I don't know what's going to occur. That's probably how you feel about it sometimes, what the court is doing. I suppose you can't anticipate what the court is going to do. Ms. Abramson says, I don't know how you can say that, Judge. The court says, but believe me, I have a tougher time. Hold on, the dog is, of course, interrupting my hand with my mouse. He's got to get up right at the end of the page here. The court says, but believe me, I have a tougher time figuring out what you folks are going to do. Ms. Abramson says, well, there's more of us. The court says, but my suggestion is this, that you submit whatever you have to Dr. Dietz that you want him to consider, and then if he doesn't consider it and he does testify, his decision not to consider it, perhaps once it's presented to him, would be an issue that can be litigated as to whether that's a subject of impeachment along with those matters that he does consider that you do give him. Hold on one second. I gotta let the dog out. I am back and I miss the very young puppy days because he slept a lot more. He doesn't sleep quite as much now. He'll sleep maybe an hour and wake up, and then I gotta take him out or do something for him. He's always like getting into something, so I gotta keep him entertained. Anyways, sorry for the interruption. I believe this was Ms. Abramson. Yeah, Ms. Abramson is talking still. And she says, but rather than jump up in the middle of his presentation and have disclosures of what it is he has been presented with, I would suggest if you already have materials, send it to him and it'll be, wait, is this the court? This might be the court talking. Oh, it is the court. Sorry, this is the court talking. He says, send it to him. It'll be up to him to decide what he needs and what he doesn't need, and you can go from there. I might It might be that his needs will. Why can I not talk today? I'm so sorry. Let me slow down. Brain, slow it down. Inhale, exhale. Okay. It might be that his needs will change based upon a review of Dr. Wilson's testimony. If he is reviewing it, I don't know if he is or not, as well as the initial contact with your client. So it's really difficult to go much farther than that. I think you would be on the safe side in just giving him what you want or what you think he should have. Are there any other matters that we have to discuss now or should discuss, or can we use this time to discuss anything while we are waiting for the jury to come up? Any anticipation of matters that might arise during examination that might require a recess? Mr. Levin says, no, Your Honor. Ms. Abramson says, excuse me, Your Honor. The court says, okay, we'll take a short break until the jurors come out. So Ms. Abramson left the room. The court is now back after a 10-minute break. Okay, everybody is here. We'll have the jury out, please. So now the jury enters the courtroom. The court says, the jury is in the courtroom and good morning to all. Ready to resume with the trial. We have the witness on the stand. Dr. Wilson, I remind you, you're under oath and we're in cross-examination. We could do a clip here. Oh, I'm talking to myself. Yes, I thought I was paused. Hold on. Sorry, I thought I had paused. I like to do my timestamps as I'm recording, and it helps save me time in the end. And then it also helps me figure out if I've got like little portions of the video that I want to clip. So I'll probably clip that. All right. Anyways, moving on. So you're saying that that was your understanding? Is that your understanding based upon your conversation with the defendant? Correct. So he used the words foreboding. No, that was my understanding of what he was saying, the word in the context of the discussion, the word vampire. Well, can you tell us what specifically he said concerning his beliefs that his mother was a vampire? I'll have to find the reference in the notes if you know. I'd be able to do it. Yes, yes. Tablet 1, page 36. It says, Mr. Khan, the witness says, thank you. Is there a stapler in the courtroom that I could use? The court says, sure. The witness says, I'm trying to avoid a problem here. Thank you. Page 36. Mr. Khan says, yes. Bottom of the page, the reference uh, is, quote, felt like mother really a vampire. Mr. Khan says, right. So did he elaborate on what he meant by vampire? Well, that remark was made in the context of what preceded it, and so, in order to understand the remark, you have to go back and look up at the context in which it was being made. Uh-huh, says Mr. Khan. He doesn't want to hear that. Uh, and the witness says, that's what the notes reflect on this page. And so, if you look above the sentence where the reference is, he's describing being my notes, saying, she said, I know more than you think. She said, I know what's been happening. You think I'm stupid. A reference I put in there alluding to the sexual molestation. Erik felt like living with a stranger, felt like mother really a vampire. And it continued on to the next page. I said, I hate you, and went out the door. That's when he found out that she knew all along. And then it continues with some notations about the context in which that remark was made. Next question. So that was an answer, I guess, to the question, that whole long spiel. Don't even remember what the question was. Mr. Menendez was referring to that part of his testimony where he said that after having a dispute or a confrontation with his father in his bedroom, he ran downstairs. This was on Thursday night and saw his mother in the den and spoke to her and then ran to the guest house. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. And it was in that context that the defendant said he felt that his mother was really a vampire. Is that correct? Correct. And when he said that, did you stop him and ask him, what do you mean you felt like your mother was a vampire? I think I answered your question before, but I'll repeat my answer. No, I didn't ask him that specific question, but to be responsive to your question. So, no, he didn't ask why he said that. So, when he said he felt like his mother was really a vampire, you didn't ask any follow up questions as to the use of that term. Well, what does the vampire do? It sucks your energy, it sucks your life away. So, it's a pretty good analogy of living with someone who does more, a parent who takes your energy more than she gives you energy. Parents are supposed to nurture you, take care of you, and all those things. She wasn't doing that. So all of her um, actions were vampiric, where she was basically taking their energy, taking their safety, taking their self esteem, whatever it was that she was taking at the time. Even just like your safety, when you're being yelled at and things are being thrown in the room as someone's screaming and yelling at you, that's scary. That's traumatic. So she's taking away that feeling of safety, that safety feeling you have with a parent, you're supposed to have, anyways. So that's, to me, that's telling. He answers, seemed rather clear to me in the context he's describing that his mother's, indicating she knows what's going on. There's a sense of betrayal, and he's using an adjective. Adjective. It's like living with a stranger. Felt like my mother is really a vampire. In that context, the response seems very clear to me that he's perceiving his mother now on this Thursday night with her disclosure that he knows what's going on, or that she knows what's going on, and now being like a vampire, this evil, powerful, foreboding figure who's known and hasn't done anything to protect him in that sense. That's the context in which his words appear. Dr. Wilson, he didn't say his mother was like a vampire. He said he felt like his mother was really a vampire. Correct? Now, did you ever hear concerns on his behalf that he felt his mother was a witch? Yes. And you were trying to assess his mental state at the time of the commission of the crime. Is that what you were doing? Yes. In case you forgot, he did think that she was a witch or had some kind of powers or abilities that were maybe supernatural, because she knew everything about what was going on in his life, because she was eavesdropping on his phone line, and because she would snoop and pry, and they knew the boys didn't have any privacy, and they anytime they were on the phone would light up and the parents could see, oh, someone's on the phone, and I can just click on the one phone and listen in, no problem. When he indicated to you that he felt that his mother was really a vampire, you didn't even give it a one single follow-up question. Objection, argumentative. Rephrase the question, says the court. Mr. Khan says, did you ask any follow-up questions whatsoever when the defendant said he felt his mother was really a vampire? No, I didn't. How often do you cross-examine patients? I'm not sure I understand your question. Patients that are in treatment, or what? How often do you cross-examine patients for forensic purposes? Quite often. Do you do probing cross-examinations of them? Where I think it's important to try to get clarity or to play devil's advocate to see how they respond to questions that are phrased in the form of being a devil's advocate. You weren't just there to look for symptoms of PTSD to go along with the diagnosis of PTSD? I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question. You weren't there just to look for symptoms of PTSD. No, of course not. Now, you were aware of the defendant before you interviewed him. You were aware of the defendant's testimony that he went down to San Diego and used a phony identification because he had lost his ID. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Did he indicate to you during your interview with him that he couldn't use his license because Jose might find out if he got the NRA mail or something like that? Yes, he did. And that is the reason that he gave you for not using his license? No, it's not. Well, can you tell us if you indicated in your notes that Erik Menendez said that he couldn't use his own license because Jose might find out if he got NRA mail or something? Could you tell me where you're referring to in my notes? I know you're referring to them. Yes, I'm referring to tablet 5. Uh-huh, says the witness. Page 19, says Mr. Khan. The witness says, okay, let me find that. At the bottom of the page, is that what you're referring to? Yes, okay. Well, what's your question? My question is, did he say that to you? Yes, he did. Did that strike you as a contradiction from his story that he used a phony identification because he had lost his own license? No. You don't see a contradiction there? No, I don't. What was it? What was the question? Can you tell if Erik said that he couldn't use his own license because Jose might find out? Well, two things can be true at the same time. He probably didn't want to use his license because one, he didn't have a license at the time. Two, Jose tracking it, the mailing, whatever he was concerned about, the NRA finding out and somehow getting in touch with Jose or something. I don't know. Um, so that's what they're talking about. You don't see a contradiction there? No. Because again, it's not contradicting. It just means that, you can have multiple reasons for doing things. I hate when people are like, well, you said you did something because of this. Well, yeah, I did. But I also have X, Y, and Z reasons for doing the things that I did. It's not, I mean, people are complex and you can have multiple reasons for wanting to do things. Anyways, now we're discussing the tests yesterday. Yes. We discussed the first test, the CAPS test. Is that correct? Yes. Now, the CAPS test, for each of those questions that you asked him, we mentioned that there were 30 questions or 30 areas, each consisting of two different questions, the frequency and intensity of certain symptoms. Is that correct? Correct. And then, did you give him a rating both for the current diagnosis and for the lifetime diagnosis? Yes. And is that because you asked him in regard to each of those questions whether he currently had that particular symptom and whether he had that symptom sometime in the past? Yes. Is that based upon those answers that you gave him both a current and a lifetime rating? Is that correct? Correct. Now you also gave him a test called the impact of events scale. Is that correct? Correct. And that test consists of 22 questions. Is that correct? That's correct. In regard to each of those questions, you asked him to rate the frequency of that particular symptom. Is that correct? That's correct. And you asked him to do so. The witness, Ms. Abrahamson says, the witness seems to be looking for. The witness says, I don't have a copy of what you're referring to. Your Honor, it might make it a lot more expeditious if I could have a copy of the same materials he's going to ask me about, then we can have the same page. The court says, I don't know if there's another set or not. Okay, well, you should ask Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan says, I don't have a copy. Ms. Abramson says, let me see if I do. Court says, are you going to be asking detailed questions about that questionnaire? Not, says Mr. Khan. If you are, says the court, then Mr. Khan says, I could show it to him if it requires something specific, of course. The witness says, that's fine with me too. I thought it might be easier if we were working from the same document, Your Honor. The court says, yes, if there's another way around. The witness says, if Mr. Khan wants to come up here, whatever is going to work for the court. The court says, let's see if Ms. Abramson has one. Ms. Abramson says, I may just have rough drafts. The witness says, let's go the other way. Court says, if it's not the same document, it doesn't matter. Ms. Amerson says, I'm not sure. I don't know if this is the rough draft or if this is the final version. The witness says, I can compare with his and then we'll know. It will only take 1 second. Ms. Amerson says, no, it's the draft. The witness says, all right, let's just work from this, Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan says, are you saying that there are drafts of the exhibit that has been marked? I think there's just one original as far as I'm concerned that I'm aware of. Well, didn't you just say that the one that Ms. Abramson showed you was a draft? It might be because that has a line on it. It looks like they're the same except that had a line. So that may have been Xeroxed after that one. Now, in regard to this impact of events scale, the frequency rating that you gave to the defendant was based upon your asking him whether he had these symptoms, not at all, rarely, sometimes, and often. Is that correct? Correct. And you asked him to do that both for the week before the killings in this case as well as the current time. Is that correct? Correct. And an example of the type of question that you gave him is I I had trouble staying asleep. Is that correct? Correct. And you asked him to rate himself as to what extent is true. Is that correct? Yes. And he told you in response to that question that he often has trouble of staying asleep at the current time, and he often had trouble staying asleep a week before the shooting. Is that correct? That's correct. And you accepted his answer. Is that correct? Yes. Did you ask probing questions on these? Yes. What type of probing questions did you ask? I asked questions like, "Tell me why was that difficult for you to sleep? For example, a week before the shootings." And Mr. Erik Menendez said to me, "I had a really hard time sleeping during that whole week. I was up and down." He said, "I kept thinking about everything that was going on. I was really upset. I'd try to go to sleep and my mind would race. I'd think about what's happening. It's hard for me to sleep. I kept thinking, what's going on? There's all these changes taking place." He was thinking about the sexual molestation and how he wanted it to stop. That his hope of going away to college, seemed to have vanished, and he was feeling this intensity, and that he described this agitated difficulty going to sleep. He also indicated to me, I asked him, I said, "Well, how much sleep do you think you got during that period of time?" And he said, "Well, maybe 4 or 5 hours." And I said, "Well, what do you need? What do you require? What's normal for you? Or what makes you feel rested?" He said, "I'd like to get about 8 or 9 hours of sleep." Mr. Khan asks, and then after you asked him questions like that, then you would use that answer that he gave you for the purposes of scoring the questionnaire. Is that correct? No, it's the other way around. He would make the rating first, okay? And then I would ask follow-up questions. Okay, but after any of the probing questions that you asked him, did you ever change the rating that he had given you or that he had given himself? No. So you always accepted his rating, regardless of the probing questions. Is that correct? Objection argumentative. The court says rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says, did you always accept the rating that he gave himself, regardless of what was revealed in the probing questions? I'm not sure how to answer that because the answers he gave were consistent with the rating scale, so there wasn't any reason to mark it differently. The answer is no. You never changed the rating he gave himself after you asked these probing questions. Is that correct? Objection, says Ms. Abramson. The witness says correct. Ms. Abramson says to the tone as argumentative. Overruled, says the court. The witness says correct. Mr. Khan asks, and was the purpose of the probing questions to see if perhaps you were going to change the rating that he gave himself? No. The purpose of the probing question is to clarify and perhaps additional information on what that specific symptom is about for him. So you weren't looking for perhaps reasons why maybe you should question the rating that he gave himself? No, indeed, I did look for that. And that's the reason for asking the clarifying questions because it would give some information about the intensity and the frequency of those specific PTSD symptoms for Mr. Erik Menendez. But you never found any reason to change the rating that he had given himself. Is that correct? That's correct. Now, at the time that you gave the test of to the defendant, he was in the county jail waiting trial on the capital case. Is that correct? I answered that yesterday, correct. Did you feel that that was something that might cause a person in and of itself, something that might cause a person to show the effects of PTSD? Is your question hypothetically for a person who is incarcerated and facing trial, could that cause a person to show symptoms of PTSD? Is that your question? Yes, that's the question. In the hypothetical sense, yes, it's possible. Why is that? That a person in county jail facing death penalty charges might show symptoms of PTSD? Well, they might show, again, your question in the hypothetical sense? Yes. In the hypothetical sense, somebody who's facing jail and facing a trial and facing incarceration, that certainly could be stressful, potentially traumatic, I would think, for some people, and therefore they might respond that way. It's possible. And so when you gave him the series of questions in the impact of the event scale, would you agree that some of these feelings or symptoms that could arise from his being in county jail facing capital charges? Now you're referring specifically to the defendant? Well, let me give you an example. I had trouble falling asleep. Did you feel that that was a symptom which perhaps the defendant experienced simply by virtue of the fact that he was in county jail facing a capital charge? No, I didn't. He said that he had trouble concentrating. Is that correct? Correct. Do you feel that that was something which Mr. Menendez might have experienced simply because he was in county jail facing capital charges? No, I don't. For many symptoms, the reason is really clear to me, and that is beyond his own response to the test. There is ample documentation from many other sources that this problem has existed for a long time, and therefore, when I consider the response of the test, what I see is it's absolutely consistent with a pattern of problems of concentration or problems with sleep, just like the item you just asked, that has existed in the history for many, many, many years and therefore is consistent with the symptomology of post traumatic stress disorder, not related specifically to being incarcerated in the Los Angeles County Jail. So there's your answer. It's not from being incarcerated. Now, I asked you yesterday whether you interviewed any persons who had observed any sexual molestation by the defendant, either from his father or his mother. Is that correct? I believe your question was whether I'd ever received any information from an eyewitness. Uh huh. As to sexual molestation by his father or mother, right? That's right, says Mr. Khan. And you did not interview a person who provided you with information and you did not receive any information concerning an eyewitness to such sexual assaults. Is that correct? Correct. And then I asked you yesterday about physical abuse, whether you interviewed any persons or received any information concerning persons who actually witnessed Erik Menendez being physically struck by either parent. Is that correct? Correct. And you wanted an opportunity to review your notes. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay, now that you've reviewed your notes, do you have the names of those witnesses who observed that? Yes, I do. Who's that? First of all, Marta Cano. And in her testimony, and actually I've spoken with her personally for about an hour about the specific issue, and she indicated to me that there were numerous occasions over many situations where she personally witnessed her brother, Jose Menendez, physically assault Erik Menendez, and she provided very explicit and graphic details about how the physical assault took place. She described it as occurring at soccer matches. She described it as occurring in family gatherings as well as other places. And what she specifically described is watching her brother grab Erik Menendez by the arm. She indicated that he had a grip on his arm and she demonstrated on one arm, pinching very hard, pulling Erik Menendez, that he grimaced when he pulled her. When he pulled on Erik. That Mr. Jose Menendez would take his body, pull him forward, and slap him in the head. And this was a frequent pattern of physical assault to Erik Menendez over many years and many different situations. When did you interview her? I interviewed her yesterday afternoon and this morning as well. Is she present in the courtroom today? She's right there in the second aisle. Did she testify at all in that first trial? I don't know if she testified to all of that in the first trial. She testified to parts of that, is my recollection. She testified that Jose Menendez would sometimes grab his son by the arm. Is that correct? To the best of my recollection, that's correct. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm not sure the witness has finished answering the question, though, about the court says he's answered the question, so let's go on. That just seems like the court doesn't want him to go further. Mr. Khan says, Did you see deviations from what she told you yesterday and what she testified to in the first trial? Ms. Abramson says, Objection, calls for a conclusion. The court says, Sustained. Mr. Khan says, Did you find that her testimony, well, you reviewed her testimony, is that correct? Correct. And you interviewed her yesterday, is that correct? Yes, and this morning. Did she provide additional details to you that she did not provide in her testimony? Yes, I believe she did. Ms. Abrams says, calls for conclusion. The court says, well, his answer is so overruled. That's a reason to overrule. Mr. Khan says, and did you wonder why she did not testify to those additional details the first time around? Objection, Your Honor. It's irrelevant whether he wondered. Sustained. Mr. Khan says, and Marticano was here yesterday when I asked you that question. Is that correct? Yes, she was. In the courtroom? Correct. So the physical abuse, then, that you learned from Marticano yesterday concerned things that took place in public on a soccer field? Yes. Any other witnesses ever saw any physical contact, physical abuse of Erik Menendez with their own eyes? Yes. There's a very similar description that was provided by Meredith Geisler, who was Erik Menendez's swim coach. What did you learn from? Is that based upon Meredith Geisler's testimony? I think it's based on the interviews that we conducted with her, and I think in part of her testimony, there was two different sources of information that I'm thinking about here. You have those reports with you today? No, I don't have them with me. No, I don't have them with me. Are you relying upon those reports to some extent in answering that question? Sure. Where are those reports? I think Ms. Abramson says, I'm going to object. Counsel has been given a list. The court says, he's asking the witness where the reports are. You can answer the question. The witness says, I think you have a copy of the reports. This judge really sucks because the judge is also there to protect the witness from being badgered and asked repeatedly the same questions over and over again. You're supposed to protect the witness from certain types of questioning, certain types of hostility coming from the prosecutor. So this is garbage to me when this gets objected to and then the court's just like, well, you can answer the question. It's fine. He's just asking the witness where the reports are, even though it seems like the prosecutor is kind of coming aggressively at the witness for no reason. And Mr. Khan says, I'd like to see a copy of the reports that was given to the witness before I continued in this area. Do you have it? Asks the court. Mr. Khan says, I'm talking about the report that was actually given, not the report given to us. Ms. Abramson says, well, I would object to counsel's remarks. The court says, let's not get into a debate here. If you have something that was turned over to the prosecution, why don't you show it to the witness and see if that's what you are referring to? Instead of saying, Mr. Khan, or telling the jury, ignore Mr. Khan's comments, remarks, he makes it about Leslie Abramson and almost makes it like he turns the burden back onto her and says, why don't you just show it to the witness? Why don't you just get it? Let's not debate, Ms. Abramson. It's you're the problem. Why are you debating when I don't ever sustain any of the objections that you throw out there? Mr. Khan says, other than Meredith Geisler, any other witnesses? Yes. There's one other witness, I think, that provides some corroboration about the physical abuse, and that was the testimony of Alan Anderson. I'm not asking you for corroboration. You understand my question is directed to eyewitnesses. Objection, argumentative. The court says, rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says, did you have information from any other witnesses who observed either Jose Menendez or Kitty Menendez physically abuse Erik Menendez with their own eyes? No, those would be the two principal ones, though. Then, I believe uh, Peter Cano, isn't that the name of Marta's husband? Uh, he saw the physical abuse. When they were young, or maybe it was Lyle, so maybe it wasn't Erik, but still, he saw physical abuse when they were younger, and he actually did approach Jose Menendez and said, what you're doing, that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that. And Jose was basically like, mind your business. Get out of my business. This is my kid. I'll do what I want. Um, so what was it that you learned from Meredith Geisler? What was learned from Meredith Geisler was that Mr. Menendez would pull Erik out of the swimming pool, grab him by the arm in a similar manner that was described by Marta Cano. Pull him by the arm? Grab him by the arm and pull him out of the swimming pool. Slap him in the head? I don't know about slap him in the head, but clearly grabbing him. But just pulling by the arm. Ms. Abramson says, I would object to the form of the question, Your Honor. Overruled. The witness says, grabbing him by the arm and pulling him out of the pool. By the arm, like pulling him out of the pool by the arm. Are you not getting that part? Yanking him out of the pool by the arm. Should we say it differently? Because I think Mr. Khan is like, well, he was just helping him out of the pool, right? Whatever. Mr. Khan says, and how many times did Meredith Geisler observe Jose Menendez pull his son by the arm? I'm not clear. Well, based on your interview of the materials, what is your understanding about Meredith? Yes. Okay. My review of the material, was that she was the swimming coach of Erik Menendez, and as she was being interviewed, she talked about the pattern of interaction between Mrs. Menendez and Jose Menendez to Erik Menendez while he was taking swimming lessons and competing competitively in swimming. And it was in the content of that description that she described a number of different things. And that's, Mr. Khan says, I make a motion to strike as non-responsive. The court says he hasn't finished his answer. The witness says, right. There were a number of different things that she described in the context of characterizing a pattern of interaction between the parents and Erik Menendez. And in the context of that description that she provided, she talked about Jose Menendez coming at the conclusion. Mr. Khan says, I would like, the witness says, I'm not done answering. The court says, let him finish his answer. The witness says, coming at the end of swimming practice when they had completed the training and then grabbing Erik and demanding that he continue to swim additional laps. That was the context in which the observation was made. My question to you is, how many times, according to Meredith Geisler, did she observe Jose Menendez grab his son by the arm? I don't know. Is that because did she specify a number? Again, I don't know. Well, you read the materials, is that correct? Yes. Are you saying you forgot what you read? No, I'm not saying I forgot what I read. I'm saying that was the context of the description, and I don't know that if she said this happened 10 times or one time, she was putting it in context of the relationship of the parents to Erik Menendez in terms of their treatment of the children, in terms of his swimming training and his competition in swimming. So she said something along the lines of she would have say all the syllables mouth. Sorry, my mouth is not cooperating today. So she said something along the lines of she would have observed Jose Menendez grab him by his arm. Is that correct? I'd have to go to the document to look at exactly what she said. Now, have you seen parents grab their children by the arm? Sure. And would you say that that is a form of abuse? It depends on the way in which the parent grabs the child, whether or not it's abusive. There are different ways obviously, to grab children and to grab them from a swimming pool or to grab them in any context, whether it's done rather aggressively in that way, it certainly could be abusive. Well, other than what Marticano observed on the soccer field of Jose hitting his son, was there any other witness who observed at any time in the life of Erik Menendez his father striking him? As I sit here, no, I can't think of any other examples. The example I was talking about with Peter Cano was like he legit punched like a 5-year-old Lyle or Erik, whoever, whichever one it was. I think it might have been Lyle. And he like, it was like a almost like a full punch. Um, Next question. Are there any witnesses who observed at any time in the life of Erik Menendez his mother, Kitty Menendez, striking him? Let me double check that just for a second. The witness says, I had a recollection that Diane Vandermolen had witnessed episodes of slapping, but I can't find the reference in my notes right now. So, at least at that point in time, you can't think of any witnesses who observed Kitty Menendez strike Erik Menendez. Objection, Your Honor, that's argumentative and it's contrary to what he just said. Overruled. The witness says, would you repeat the question? Yes. Can you give us the name of any witnesses who observed Kitty Menendez strike Erik Menendez at any time during the course of his life? Say it again, Mr. Khan. Is he messing with him? Can you give us the name of any witnesses who observed Kitty Menendez strike Erik Menendez at any time during the course of his life? The witness says again, my recollection is that Diane Vandermolen had witnessed events when he was living in the Menendez family home, but I can't find that particular reference as I sit here at the moment. Could you be mistaken about that? Ms. Amerson says, I'm going to object. The record speaks for itself. The court says the record at this point is only the witness's recollection because he's asking the question, or he's being asked the question. We're not asking what Ms. Vandermolen did or didn't say, just his recollection of it. So your answer is, do you have a recollection? The witness says, that's my recollection of it, Your Honor, that was indicated by Diane Vandermolen during the 22 months that she lived with the family. Mr. Khan says, all right. Let me show you a statement of Meredith Gessler. Was this the statement that you were relying upon? The witness reads it and says, yes. Did you find in there where you derived the information about how Jose Menendez would physically assault his son? Yes. There are two pieces of information here. One, the first one here in the second paragraph where she says she recalled, quote, once Jose was waiting for Erik at the end of the race and pulled Erik out of the water, Jose was criticizing Erik and telling him that he could have pushed off and swam faster. Erik seemed to just take it, but was also sad because it seemed that he was never good enough. And the other piece that was the end of the quote. And the other piece that I connected to that is at the back of the document on page 31, where Meredith Geisler says, quote, Meredith felt, these are his notes, Meredith felt maybe that the boys were mentally abused, and she was almost not surprised that this could happen. Meredith did feel that the boys were mentally abused from what she observed during those summers. Observant girl, if only that reporting of it could have gone further and done something. Maybe she didn't report it. Maybe she noticed it and didn't say anything because people didn't always interfere like that. Like now you see a kid being abused and everybody's going to interfere on the street. But in the past, that's your business. You discipline your kid how you want, and I'm just going to look the other way and walk right past it. Because we didn't know the effects of abuse. We didn't recognize abuse for what it is as we do now. But many people are more in tune with what abuse is. It's more mainstream to talk about because it was not at this point, especially male on male abuse. Will you lay down, please? I'm holding the blanket for you. So I was just talking to you about physical abuse, doctor. Did you understand my question? Yes. The only reference in this document to physical abuse is she recalled once that Jose was waiting for Erik at the end of a race and pulled him out of the water. Is that correct? Correct. So when you told us today, I was questioning you today if in all the documents that have been provided to you, you observed any reports of physical assaults by Jose Menendez upon his son, Erik Menendez. You referred first to Marticano, and then you referred secondly to this document. Is that correct? Correct. Where in this document do you find reference to Jose physically assaulting his son? Ms. Abramson says, asked and answered, Your Honor. The court says, other than what you've already answered? The witness says, that's it, Your Honor. Mr. Khan says, are you trying to exaggerate things a little bit, doctor, to help out Erik Menendez in this case? Objection, argumentative. Overruled. The witness says no. Mr. Khan says, can you tell us then why, when this document here simply says that on one occasion Jose pulled Erik out of the water and told this jury that that was an instance of physical assault that you relied upon? Yes. Ms. Amerson says, objection, Your Honor. Never mind. The witness says, yes, I'll answer it. The reason that I looked at that way is because there is a larger context in which there's a great deal of information about the interaction pattern of Mr. Jose Menendez with Erik Menendez. And that certainly seemed consistent with the other body of information that talks about his style of relating to his son in these intimidating, aggressive, domineering, and forceful ways. Mic drop, Dr. Wilson. Mr. Khan says, well, you understand my question was only relating to physical assault, didn't you, doctor? Yes, I did. Objection, argumentative. Overruled. Yes, I did, says the witness. Mr. Khan says, and there's no reference to a physical assault in this document, is there, doctor? Objection, argumentative. Overruled. The witness says, doesn't refer to a physical assault, correct? Mr. Khan says, now, I would argue that pulling him out of the pool by his arm is physical. That's physical assault. Now, after you gave him the impact of event scale, you relied upon each of the ratings that he had given himself. Is that correct? Are you referring to the impact of events scale? Yes. Then yes. Mr. Khan says, all right, you also gave him an exam called the SCL-90R. Is that correct? Correct. And this particular test consists of 90 questions. Correct. And in these 90 questions, the defendant was once again asked to rate himself. Is that correct? Correct. And you asked him in this test how much he was distressed by 90 separate things. Is that correct? Correct. Did you ask him, how these events affected or these symptoms distressed him at the time of the exam or at the time of the commission of the crime? No, at the time of the exam. So that would tell you then if he was suffering from PTSD only at the time of the only at the time of the exam. Is that correct? No, that's not correct. I think I clarified that yesterday. This is not an exam that specifically measures PTSD. The SCL-90 is a measurement of general psychiatric symptomology across 9 different symptom clusters. And in addition, there's some other indices provided in the text. Provided in the text. Sorry. It's a symptom checklist in which the person responding endorses with different degrees of frequency how often they experience a particular symptom. So you asked him, for example, are you distressed by crying easily? Is that correct? Yes. And he rated himself extremely. Is that correct? Correct. Now, did you feel that if a person was so inclined, this would be something that would be easy to lie about? Sure. You asked him if he was distressed by poor appetite, and he indicated extremely. Is that correct? Correct. Did you feel that that was an answer that if a person was so inclined, he would easily lie about? Sure. And you asked him if he was feeling blue and feeling lonely and feeling fearful. Is that correct? Yes. And in each of those areas, do you recall that he answered extremely? I don't have the document, but if that's all it says, I'll take your word for it. So what are we going to do? We're just this prosecutor's um I guess strategy today. Like I felt like he was really doing well, and he started off strong with his cross examination. He really kind of got the doctor to concede on some things. He's kind of doing it now, but here he's just basically like his main arguments are, well, you gave Erik these tests, but you're only relying on Erik's answers for the tests, right? So, okay, we can't trust him because we can't trust Erik. Therefore, you can't trust the tests. Is basically what he's trying to argue here and trying to put forth before the jury, trying to infer that. And that's stupid because I mean all of those tests, that's how you rate it. You have to take the patient's word for it, whether they are coming to you for treatment or you've been hired to treat them by the law, by some state official. So you still have to rate it based on, like, how do you not, it's something you can't prove, right? So how do you say Erik was lying or Erik wasn't lying when he did the test? You can't prove one way or the other. But here we're just taking apart every single question and going, well, you took his word for this, right? Okay, well, you took his word for this, right? So how do we trust any of this? But it's not, I don't think this is very productive or effective, in my opinion. I think it's just kind of beating a dead horse over and over again. You're either going to believe the witness or you're not. And you're either going to believe that he gave as truthful answers as he could, or you're not. And is there motivation to lie? Perhaps. Is there motivation to tell the truth? If the truth is that his dad beat him, sexually molested him, all the things that came out in this trial, yeah, you should tell the truth. But telling the truth and then being scrutinized for it. So either way, he's going to be criticized for his answers on these tests, is basically my point. He's going to be criticized for his answers because you can't verify them one way or another because you can't prove what's inside someone's head. So this whole argument, for me, falls apart with this prosecutor. That's all I'm saying about that. We can move on. So Mr. Khan asks, do you remember he answered extremely for all of these questions? And the witness says, I don't have the document, but I'll take your word for it. Okay. Well, did you feel that each and every one of those areas were areas in which a person could easily lie about? Sure. And then the fourth test that you gave was a test that, I don't know if I have it here, that had 100 questions. That's correct. Trauma symptom inventory. You have it in front of you, says the witness. Mr. Khan says, perhaps you can tell us if it's in the package. Let me look. Are you looking for the questionnaire itself, Mr. Khan? Yes. You don't have it in here? We provided it to you. If you want a copy, I'll give you one. I've got one here if you want. That's what you're looking for. Mr. Khan says, now, and that's embarrassing to have the witness tell you, you don't have the right exhibit. Let me give you the right one. There you go. In this questionnaire, you once again asked the defendant to rate himself. Is that correct? Yes. And this scale was 0, 1, 2, or 3 scale. Is that correct? Why don't you just say it's on a scale from 1 to 3, not it was 0, 1, 2, yeah, whatever. Well, I guess it's 0 to 3. He says yes. 0 meaning never and 3 meaning often. Is that correct? Correct. And this was directed to his experiences over the past 6 months. Is that correct? Correct. You asked him, for example, within the past 6 months, have you experienced nightmares in this? Or is that correct? Correct. And you relied upon his answer that he gave to that. Is that correct? Yes. And you asked him questions like, have you experienced wishing that you were dead? Is that correct? Yes. And you relied upon his answers to that? Yes. Did you feel that this was coming that a person could lie about it if they were so inclined. They could lie about it if they're so inclined, says the witness. Mr. Khan says, now, after you, in your testimony, in your direct examination, I believe that you showed a chart to the jury. Is that correct? Correct. Now, is that chart based upon one of the exams that you gave the defendant, or was that based upon all of the exams that you gave the defendant? The chart that I was referring to yesterday in my direct testimony was the chart that pertains to the trauma symptom inventory, and so it's one test. All right, so this is just the results of one test, is that correct? That's correct. Is that the test consisting of 100 questions? Correct. If you don't mind, could I have that test? Yeah, if you don't mind, can I have that test back for one more moment? Just a second. Here you go. So, this is a test in which he rated himself on 100 questions from 0 to 3. Is that correct? Correct. And what does this chart purport to represent? Well, what the chart purports to represent, first of all, is Mr. Menendez's scores on various subscales of test, including the validity scale and scales that were referred to previously in my testimony that measure symptom clusters of associated traumatic stress, as well as associated features such as impaired self-reference, tension-reducing behavior, sexual concerns, and dysfunctional sexual behavior. So on this chart is what represented as we look at it together with the blue profile is Erik Menendez's profile as he responded to the items, the 100 items you just referred to on this test. It then provides a summary score, which converts the raw score. If you see the chart there on the left, it says raw, which is his raw score, which is tallied across subscales converted to a standard unit of measurement, an equal statistical measurement of intervals that then is then plotted to each of the public scales, generating a profile where he scores high on these measurements of traumatic stress and symptomology and associated features. The other thing in the chart, as we've noted, is these plots of the PTSD scale as determined by Dr. Brier's research in developing this instrument for persons in the general population who were identified as suffering positively from a diagnosis of PTSD. Okay, and that red line then represents sort of the average score of people who are suffering from PTSD. Is that correct? That's one way you could look at it. It's kind of a profile saying when persons in the general population who have known traumatic experience, like take this particular questionnaire, this is the way their profile tends to look. All right, the thin blue represents Erik Menendez. Is that correct? Correct. Now, some of the peaks in that line representing Erik Menendez go above the red line and some go below the red line. Is that correct? That's correct. And so, how do you interpret those peaks? In order for you to conclude that a person was suffering from post traumatic stress disorder, how must this individual scoring correspond, or closely must this line correspond to the red line? Okay, it's a good question. Let me answer it this way. It might be easier, Your Honor, if I could get down. The court says, sure. The witness says, all right. He's a professional witness. He's just like, Your Honor, I'm just going to talk to you because you're the one that allows it. Can I just go step up over there? This is just going to be easier. And can we use this document instead because you don't have the right document, prosecutor? Like this witness is on it. He's a professional witness. He's done this a time or two. The witness says, all right, we start here and you see this number 50, which represents the, I'm sorry, I've got my back to you. I apologize. The score value of 50 is this conversion of the scale to where the mean point is in a distribution of any kind of numerical score. Okay. This is a common yardstick. This is a ruler that makes all of these numbers on an equivocal interval. So that line indicates where every score would fall in some kind of distribution or measure of something you want to measure. In this case, we're measuring traumatic stress syndromes. The black line here 65 going across the chart represents a standard deviation or elevation from the mean. In other words, it means that they're moving from an average score towards the point where you say, okay, now we're above, well above. We are moving beyond the average score. So the way this test is constructed is that when scores are above the black line of 65, we call that an elevation, meaning that statistically this is now above one standard deviation where its elevation is a higher score in terms of probability distribution. All right. So to answer your question, Mr. Khan, now when we look at Mr. Erik Menendez's score and then look at what constitutes PTSD, it would mean that for a person taking this test to the specific subscales that are measuring the DSM-4 clusters of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxious arousal, intrusive re-experiencing of the trauma, this EI criteria, defensive avoidance, the C criteria, psychological activity not present before the trial. Now, these are the three sort of DSM correspondence. Now, in addition to that, we have the depression scale, the dissociative scale, which is a common feature of trauma victims. It's a common symptom for trauma parents, sexual concerns, dysfunctional sexual behavior, impaired self-reference, and attention reduction behavior. So where you would look to see where the person has a score that's above the value of 65 and specifically on the scales that measure post-traumatic stress disorder, anxious arousal, intrusive re-experiencing, defensive avoidance, that those are sort of the major correspondence to the B, C, and D criteria in the DSM-4. Then it looks at the lower associated symptom clusters known to relate to trauma. So the way you would make a determination of whether or not someone has PTSD would be to see, first of all, does their score fall above the cutoff score here of 65, meaning that it's elevated, as you see here on the profile for anxious arousal. Here, it is on the right, around 66. Erik Menendez's scores are up here. It's a score of 79. I wish we could see what they're actually looking at because it's kind of confusing listening to him. So not only is he above 65, he is above this point. So in answer to your question, this is the way you would do it clinically. You would see you would see the elevation. That's number one. Then number two, you want to look at how the profile as in ordering, in other words, what's the highest elevation and what's the lowest elevation, and then specifically look at that ordering in terms of what's most elevated in terms of PTSD. As in this case with Erik Menendez, intrusive re-experiencing is his highest score, a score of 89. I'm sorry, yeah, here. That's this one's 89. That is the peak. That's the B cluster. It's then followed by the D cluster, this hyperarousal group right here at 79. Then we go to his next elevation is depression, where we have 78 or so all the way across. So we look at the ordering from the highest to the lowest, and we look to see the ordering in terms of specific clusters of post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms and look to see if there are any above 65 because that's the statistical elevation. And so we then have the normative plot in the red line. Here is what it tends to look like in the general population for persons who have PTSD with a history of trauma. And then we take whoever takes the test, we plot their scores. In this case, we have Erik Menendez and we plot his scores and we can then see are they above, are they below this red line profile? Where are they above and where are they below? And that starts to give us information that we can interpret about his symptoms as appearing is measured by the first or by this test. What does AI represent in this chart? This one? Yes. Anxiety and irritability, not artificial intelligence. Sorry, Grok or ChatGPT or whatever you use. Anxiety and irritability. Anger and irritability, excuse me, anger and irritability. Oh, so not anxiety, anger and irritability. That's what the A stands for, anger. Is that a feature of PTSD? Yes. He scored very low on that. Yes. So what does that tell you? It says when he took this particular test that he was not reporting a great deal of anger and irritability symptoms as measured by this test. Would that suggest to you that he was not suffering from PTSD? No. Why? Because all the other symptom clusters that are classically associated with PTSD, specifically intrusive reliving of the trauma, his highest score right here. Look at that. Intrusive re-experiencing, his score in 89. It's the highest possible score. So he continually has flashbacks, memories, constantly reliving the trauma of his worst traumatic experiences. This means that when we took the test and answered those items that are deemed to measure intrusive recollections of traumatic experience, he reports very high elevations of the symptoms. Likewise, when we come over to the cluster, and that's highest next for Erik Menendez, anxious arousal, a score of 79. He is reporting across a number of items in this test that look at hyperarousal, hypervigilance, intense anxiety states, and he has an elevated score here. Again, this is the D cluster and a very pronounced elevation here. So we see that there. Then we come over again to another component of PTSD, which is the defensive avoidance. And we find his score is slightly below the cutoff point. It's at 63. So that score, in combination with the more significant results of intrusive traumatic memory, says he is not as successful as blocking or defending the traumatic memories because this is lower. He is not scoring high on that. If he scored high on that, he would have a tendency to block out, to defend, to deny, to avoid traumatic memory. We have a different pattern. He has more of the traumatic memory, less capacity to defend against those memories, to avoid them, coupled with a great deal of arousal, anxiety, tension, and physiological reactivity that's also associated with states of depression, dissociative tendencies. You see his score here. This is a major component in traumatized people. His score is literally just a notch away from the profile. So he was almost in the score range of severely traumatized people. And finally, the last component, impaired self-reference, is virtually identical to the normative profile where the red and the blue lines merge right here on impaired self-reference. His score is virtually right on the normative profile, indicating that people who had PTSD profile who had a known history of trauma, including sexual abuse, have impaired self reference, problems with self esteem, and that's right where Erik is. There are only 3 points that are really low for him, and that's the end of his answer. There are only 3 points that are really low for him. And one of those points, says Mr. Khan, is anger and irritability. Is that correct? Anger and irritability, correct. Is that a classic feature of PTSD? In some people, it is. And what is DS about? Dysfunctional sexual behavior. Obviously, he doesn't have a sex life in the prison right now, so you can't say if he's ever, if he's having a dysfunctional sexual behavior, whatever that might be. And what is TRB? Tension reduction behavior. Are these classic features of PTSD? These are associated features of PTSD, particularly in people with a history of childhood sexual abuse. With regard to anger and irritability, did you tell the defendant that this was going to be used or might be used in court, that these tests might be used in court in front of a jury? No, I didn't. Do you think that the defendant figured out that perhaps this was going to be used in court in front of a jury? Speculation, Your Honor, says Ms. Abramson. The court says sustained as to the form of the question. Wow, we actually got a sustained today. Mr. Khan says, did you think, doctor, The court says, does he need to stay up here? Mr. Khan says, no, that won't be necessary. The witness says, thank you. So I'm assuming he sits back down. Mr. Khan says, did you think, doctor, that a person who was on trial for a capital offense would want to portray himself to the jury as a very angry person? Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation. Rephrase the question, says the court. Mr. Khan says, yes, the questions going to anger and irritability were they questions that a person could lie about if he were so inclined to do so? Yes. Do you remember how many questions go to anger and ability? Just a minute, I think I can tell you. If you will bring back what you have. I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of that stuff and a score sheet. Okay, here we go. Mr. Khan, right here, says the witness. Mr. Khan, right here, these are the specific items on the test. Here is AI. This is the scoring worksheet. This is AI, anger and irritability. This gives you the item number from the questionnaire. Do you have a questionnaire? Yes, right here, says Mr. Khan. The witness continues on and says, so here's the questionnaire and here's the items 3, 15, 30. He lists off a bunch of numbers. Mr. Khan asks, so you asked the defendant if he was experiencing irritability. Is that correct? Is that number 3? Asked the witness. Yes. Then yes. And he answered 2 on that one. And you asked the defendant if he was number 15, becoming angry or little or no reason. Is that correct? For little or no reason. Right. Did you feel that that is a question that a person could lie about if he was so inclined? Sure. 34 is the next one. Mr. Khan says, being easily annoyed by other people, is that a question that you asked him? Yes, and he responded with a 2. Did you feel that that was something that you could lie about if you wanted to? Sure. And then you asked him if he was starting arguments or picking fights to get your anger out. Is that correct? Correct. That's 35. And you indicated that he gave himself a low score on that one. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. 37 is the next one, says the witness. 37. Getting angry when you didn't want to, he gave himself a low score on that. Correct. Okay. 45 is the next one. Mr. Khan asks, yelling or telling people off when you felt that you shouldn't have. He decided to give himself a low score on that one. Is that correct? Ms. Abramson says, object to the form of the question as calling for speculation. Sustained, sustained. Wow, we got 2 sustains. Mr. Khan says, well, he gave himself a low score on that one. Is that correct? Correct. 57 is the next one. Feeling mad or angry inside. He gave himself a low score on that one too. Correct. 63 is the next one. Wanting to hit something or someone. He gave himself a low score on that one too. Is that correct? Correct. 93 is the next one. Trouble controlling your temper. He gave himself a low score on that one. Correct. The court says, all right, let's take our recess here and we'll resume. Yeah, even the court's like, I'm done with this line of questioning. It's boring. So the jury he gives them their admonitions to not discuss. Ms. Abramson says, we're missing an exhibit, apparently. The witness says, I gave him the original and that's a copy of the original. Ms. Abramson says, Mr. Khan, let me see the original. This is the original that has these additional words that you wrote on it. The witness says, yes. Ms. Abramson says, well, there was a 400A marked, but we don't know where it is right now, Your Honor, so I have to mark a substitute 400A, which is the item booklet, and I will do so now. The court says, are we ready for the jury? Ms. Abramson says, now you're holding the exhibit. Do not lose it. The court says, are we ready, counsel? Mr. Khan says, yes. The court says, okay, let's get the jury out. The court says, everybody is back. You may continue your cross-examination. Mr. Khan says, thank you. The chart that we just finished looking at, you indicated that That was in response to an exam called the TSI. Is that what it is? That's correct. And that measures his PTSD, or he rates himself concerning his PTSD symptoms 46 months preceding the test. Is that correct? He rates himself in terms of the symptoms that are asked by the questionnaire. Right. So for the past 6 months, is that correct? Yes, I believe that's what the instructions say. And so you're aware that he had been in custody for over 5 years by the time you gave him that test. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Now, in addition to giving the defendant those tests, you indicated that you diagnosed the defendant independently of those tests as suffering from post traumatic stress disorder. Is that correct? Correct. First thing that you did, you said, was first you had to find the presence of a stressor. Is that correct? Correct. And the stressors that you found in this case was that the defendant that had been molested. Is that correct? That the defendant had been molested. That's correct. And then you turned to the clusters to see if the various symptoms of the clusters were satisfied. Correct. And the first cluster is a cluster that is the re-experience, the persistent re-experience cluster. That's correct. Are there 4 components to that cluster? Correct. There are 5 components to that cluster, says the witness. And the first component is whether the person is re experiencing recurrent and intrusive distressing recollections or memories of the event, including images, thoughts, or perceptions. Is that correct? Correct. And so you asked the defendant if he was re experiencing such recollections. Yes. And he indicated to you that he was? Yes. And you relied upon that representation, correct? And this is not something that you can independently, oh, sorry, he says, the witness says correct. And this is not something that you can independently verify because this is something that is in my mind. Is that correct? That's correct. So you simply took his word for it? I took his word for it, and I also considered what he said in the context of a lot of other information. And also, one other thing very important for me, and that is that given my 22 years of experience in working with persons who have post traumatic stress disorder, and including those who, as adults, have a history of childhood sexual abuse, I found that the way that he reported his symptoms, the way he characterized what he had happened to him, to be absolutely consistent with persons that are suffering from post traumatic stress disorder. Okay, well, I'm asking you at the moment, doctor, so that you understand the question that I'm asking is whether you relied upon the representation that he was making or whether you had whether this is something which whether the specific symptom is something that can be confirmed by an outside source. He changed his line of questioning 3 different times or 4 different times there. Yes, what? It can be confirmed by an outside source, says the witness. How can you confirm that Erik Menendez was experiencing recurrent and intrusive, distressing recollections by an outside source? One of the ways is what we did in terms of administering a standardized questionnaire that measures symptoms of intrusive re-experiencing, so it's independent corroboration apart from whether he tells me. It's what he responds to those items on the test, which are then characterized and compared. So then he asks, so then he takes the test. He doesn't, when he takes the test, he doesn't know that those items, what they're about. So the psychological testing is looking at a way that he is reporting that symptomology. So you're saying the test measures whether he is experiencing intrusive thoughts? It's measuring his report of having intrusive thoughts. Well, when you say the word measure, you are suggesting that you're applying some objective scale by which to determine that rather than the representations of the defendant. Is that correct? It's No, that's not quite right. Well, what question did you rely upon from these questionnaires in concluding that the defendant was re experiencing concurrent and intrusive distressing recollections? The items which made up the intrusive experience subscale, the TSI. Mr. Khan says that is questions that you put to the defendant. Is that correct? Correct. And questions that he gave himself his own rating on. Is that correct? Correct. But he doesn't know that they're measures of intrusive re experiencing. Give us an example of a question that he would not know that that is a measure of an intrusive, distressing recollection. Well, I would have to look at the book. Okay, okay. And the exhibit. Well, here's one. Item 62, suddenly remembering something upsetting from your past. That's not a specific reference to a specific event. It just says from the past, and he would respond with a scale point. Suddenly having, could you say that again? Suddenly remembering something upsetting from the past. And it doesn't refer to the content of the memory, it just says something from the past. Likewise, with the next item, 66, suddenly being reminded of something bad. Again, it doesn't refer to the specific content of what's bad. But, doctor, if a person knows that one of the features of PTSD is this persistent re experience, or rather the intrusive distress recollections, aren't those questions from categories which would include the type of material that we are referring to? Yes. Ms. Abramson says, objection, Your Honor. I'm going to object to the question as compound. As phrased, it has two parts, so break it down. Mr. Khan says, so the question was suddenly remembering the things from the past. Is that what it was? Yes. And you don't think that from that question, a person could figure it out that that would relate to recurrent and intrusive distressing recollections of events? Objection, argumentative, overruled. The witness says they could figure that out, or they may not figure it out. It depends on how they interpret it. Mr. Khan says, well, let's go on to the second category of how the traumatic event may be re experienced. The second category is recurrent distressing dreams of the event. Yes. Is that correct? And once again, what you rely upon here is making the determination that the defendant experienced that symptom is the defendant's self-report. Is that correct? Correct. Now, in regard to this cluster that we're talking about, which you indicated has 5 different symptoms for this particular cluster, did he experience all 5 of these symptoms? Yes. Okay. Let's go on to the third one in his cluster. Acting or feeling as if the traumatic event were recurring includes a sense of reliving the experience, illusions, hallucinations, and dissociative flashback episodes, including those that occur on awakening or when intoxicated. So that relates to feeling the event recurring. Is that correct? It refers to 2 components, actually. To break down the B3 criteria, the first one is acting as if, and the second feeling as if, as it's stated in there. So the first is the person answering now as if it's recurring. So that behavior is acting as if the trauma is about to happen again. That's what it means by acting as if it's recurring. And then the second component of that criteria is feeling as if. So there is a distinction. One is the internal stated feeling, this is going to happen to me, or it may happen to me, or it's about to happen to me. It's as if that's the feeling. So it could be any anxious kind of feeling associated with thinking that this could reoccur. The other part is different. That's behavioral, where the person is actually acting as if it's happening to them now. Okay, let's deal with the latter one first. This feeling as if. This feeling as if as if the event is recurring, that is something for which you rely upon the representation of the defendant. Is that correct? Correct. And there is no way to independently confirm the existence of that feeling. Is that correct? Correct. Okay, now let's go to the former part, acting as if the traumatic event was recurring. You rely in part upon the representation of the defendant so that he so acted. Is that correct? Sure. Now, are you saying that there is also some additional information, independent information, which indicated to you that the defendant was acting as if the experience was recurring? I think there is some. And what is that information which causes you to conclude that the symptom was present? If you'll note in the criteria, it says includes dissociative episodes. Yes. Okay, there are numerous entries starting with Princeton Day School or Behaviors by Erik Menendez, where he was described as spacing out, zoned out, drifted off, not paying attention, and including the comments by his tutor, Norman Poles, that while tutoring Mr. Erik Menendez, he would have difficulty commanding his attention, that he drifted off, seemed not to be present. I recall from one source he said, I would look through his eyes. I'd look into his eyes and the person wasn't there. I found that to be a very graphic description, and it's one that's commonly used to describe dissociative phenomena. I know someone who has this, and it is weird. It's like you're not even, like, you can walk up right next to them in the room and they don't even know you've been standing there for 5 minutes. And they just all of a sudden are like, whoa, how'd you get here? Like, how long have you been standing there? Kind of a scary thing, but it really does happen to people who are traumatized as children. Dr. Wilson goes on to say, so there have been many sources over many years, including tennis coaches who have seen episodes and where he had lapses of concentration where the word used the word zoned out, used the word spaced out, used the word had a change from his capacity to pay attention to what he's doing. There's a change in his consciousness. He's not necessarily all there and conscious in the room. Those multiple descriptions over many, many years in my mind are describing dissociative phenomenon that are part of his B3 criteria, acting or feeling as if the trauma were reoccurring. And of course, this is part of the intrusive re-experiencing. Now, Mr. Khan asks, now, disassociation is a normal phenomenon, not necessarily a sign of abuse. Is that correct? It can be both, says Dr. Wilson. It can be both, Mr. Khan. You're right. It can be both normal and pathological. Because sometimes people just zone out, as you say, all on their own without any particular traumatic re experience behind it. Is that correct? Yes. Let's move on to the fourth category of the persistent re experience cluster, and that is intense psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. Is that correct? Yes. And for the ending of that specific symptom, did you rely upon the representation of the defendant, Erik Menendez? Yes. Is there any external sources that could confirm that the defendant was experiencing intense psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues? Yes. And what was the external sources? There are several external sources that I find important. One is a statement made by Noel Nedley, his roommate, when he was living in Marina del Rey, that Mr. Erik Menendez had difficulty talking about girl relations. He had difficulty talking about sexuality. In fact, he described that after he would have sex, he would immediately run into the shower and wash. A similar comment was made by David Mravovich, who was also a student at Princeton Day School who went with Mr. Menendez to Cancun in November of 1989. And in one of his interviews or statements to this court, he indicated likewise that a number of specific things that I found interesting, and I am just going to refresh my memory with my notes here, that Erik avoided conversations about sex, that he seemed uncomfortable about that he seemed in disarray and chaotic and preoccupied. And this, of course, was after the shooting. So there is another source that talks about the intensification of distress around sexual matters in particular. Also, there are numerous comments and interviews and statements made by Diane Vandermolen, Kathy Simonton, Alan Vandermolen, and other relatives, including Marta Cano, that Erik would become much more tense while in the presence of his father than when the father wasn't present, that he showed attention and more apprehension, more anxiety, and often greater fear. So that external source, those external sources are pointing to specifically this criteria of increased psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues. And here we have several categories, one having to do with sexuality in terms of Erik Menendez's relationship with girls and girlfriends. Two, having to do specifically with the observed changes in his level of distress in the presence of his father, and I find those consistent with his B4 criteria. Mr. Khan says, well, category refers to distress upon exposure to cues that present or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. Is that correct? Yes. Now, if a witness said he observed the defendant become more tense in the presence of his father, you don't know, based upon that report, what Erik Menendez was distressed about, do you? No. So the mere fact of being tense in the presence of his father does not confirm in and of itself that the defendant was suffering from post traumatic stress disorder, does it? Correct. But it is a clue, a symptom, an something that was caused by the abuse. So I don't know where I was going with that. Anyways, um, it's a clue. When you add up all the different clues, all the different symptoms, all the different points in his life where he was having these different symptoms, then you add it up and you realize, yes, it is all connected and part of this. And I believe it was multiple people that said Erik tensed up when his father walked in the room. So that's not really a great argument to say, well, you don't really know what he was distressed about when he's actually distressed about the person himself and not, a specific time or day or situation related to it. It's his nerves, his tension is tied to Jose entering the room, as per many witnesses who said that. So I think that's an important part to not overlook right there. All right. The dog moved, so I can come a little closer to the screen. When he lays in my lap, he takes up more space now because he's a little bit bigger. So I needed to move the table back. Uh-oh, he lost his bone. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Next question. And that in and of itself is not evidence of molestation, is it? Correct. Now, did you say that Dr. Mravovich said that Erik Menendez experienced intense psychological distress? I didn't say that. His words were that he was uncomfortable talking about sexuality, that he observed him. This was another thing I forgot to say, that he described being very agitated after being berated by his father, that he actively avoided conversations about sexuality, and that while with him in Cancun, described him as preoccupied, in disarray, chaotic, and having no grounding or reality. So bad for Erik. Knowing all we know, what he was going through, my heart just goes out to him. I'm hoping now he's over a lot of this or has worked out a lot of this, and he's not having these re-experienced uh, traumatic recurring thoughts. I hope that, through therapy and talking it out with people and stuff and helping others in prison, I really truly hope that he's not suffering nearly as much, if at all, like he was, when he first came into the prison. Now, the people who are uncomfortable talking about sexuality are not necessarily experiencing intense psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of a traumatic event, are they? Not necessarily. That's correct. Some people just are uncomfortable talking about sexuality for any number of reasons. Is that correct? You bet. And there are many people who are uncomfortable talking about sexuality who are not suffering from post traumatic stress disorder. Isn't that true? Absolutely. And so the mere fact that a person may be uncomfortable talking about sexuality neither proves that the person was suffering from PTSD nor that the person had been molested. Is that correct? Sure. All right. Well, let's turn to the fifth category, or the fifth symptom under the persistent experience cluster, and that is physiological reactivity of exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. Now, did you rely upon the representation of Erik Menendez that he would, in fact, experience physiological reactivity on exposure to such cues? Yes. Did you have an independent evidence from other sources that Erik Menendez experienced physiological reactivity on exposure to internal or external cues that symbolized or resembled an aspect of molestation? Yes. And what is that? In Dr. Vickery's notes, as Mr. Erik Menendez began to disclose the history of sexual molestation to Dr. Vickery in 1990, this is before the first trial, right? So the first trial was in 93, so they were arrested in 1990, if you recall. The crimes happened August 20th, 1989, and in I want to say like January, February, maybe even March, like early 1990, like the first quarter of 1990, he was arrested, and then a couple days later, Lyle turned himself in. Okay, so the answer was he began to disclose the history of sexual molestation to Dr. Vickery in 1990. There were indications that he became very upset. He was agitated. He was tearful. He was sobbing. And also, when he returned to his cell, he subsequently threw up after talking about the sexual molestation, which was later then reported to Dr. Vickery and others. So, in that context, there is the external manifestation of the increased distress to another person who was able to observe this particular behavior in Mr. Erik Menendez. Are you saying that Dr. Vickery saw the defendant throw up? No, I am not. So, are you relying upon a report of Erik Menendez that he threw up? Yes. Okay, the question that I asked you, doctor, related to whether you had external source other than the report of Erik Menendez that he was experiencing physiological reactivity to exposure or on exposure to internal or external cues. Did you understand that? I didn't. Yes, very well. I understood. So you said that Dr. Vickery's notes reflect that the defendant was sad when he was reporting the claims of molestation. Is that correct? He became upset, as he described in talking about the sexual molestation. So Dr. Vickery's observing the change in Erik Menendez's behavior. So the doctor actually observed the change in his behavior here. Now, would you say that whenever a person becomes upset when reporting an event, that event is necessarily true? Are you asking that in some hypothetical way? Yes. No, not necessarily, says the witness. And you feel that if a person wanted to make himself believable, a person could become sad when reporting an event if he was so inclined to do so? What kind of question is that? Ms. Abramson says, rightfully so, objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation, and of course the judge overrules that. The witness says, if I understand your question, are you stating, could they kind of fake or make it look that way? Exactly. Yeah, they could. Now, let's move on to that was the last symptom in the cluster. Is that correct? The B cluster, correct. Well, let's move on. Sorry, I got fuzzing for something in my tongue all of a sudden. Let's move on to the C cluster. This cluster relates to the persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the trauma and numbing of general responsiveness not present before the trauma as indicated by 3 or more of the following. Is that correct? Correct. And here we're talking about avoiding things that are associated with the traumatic event. Is that correct? Correct. So because people who generally are inclined to, people who have experienced something that is traumatic generally seek to avoid that. Isn't that correct? Many people seek to avoid it. Some people, curiously enough, are really attracted to what happened during the trauma. Some people, what? Some people are really curious to go back to the origin of the trauma. Not to say I want to stay away from that forever. Some people have what might appear to the outside a morbid concern of going back to the childhood trauma. Now, Dr. Erik Menendez indicated to you that the one thing he took from his house when he moved away was the bed that he had allegedly been sexually molested on. Miss Abramson says, "Objection, Your Honor. There's no foundation for that. Overruled." Just let it in. The witness says, "Yes, he told me that." Mr. Khan says, "Would you say he had a morbid fascination for the bed that he had been molested on?" I wouldn't say it was a morbid fascination. I would say it was morbid in the sense that that was the bed in which sexual molestation had occurred. That's the bed where he last had relationships with his father. So is it morbid? Very much so. Very much so, because these acts that took place are traumatic, pathological acts. And to me, it's profoundly significant that he decided to take the bed because he is taking the bed which was part of the source of molestation and at the same time is the representation of his continued connectedness with his father, which is not resolved. That's a key part right there, though, I think. This connectedness with his father. It's almost like it kept him connected to his dad, even after his dad had been killed. In some, subconsciously, you think these things. It's not like you do it, on purpose. It's not like you think these things purposefully or even know you're thinking them. Next question. So this was kind of keepsake that you interpreted that way as a keepsake of the molestations? No, I don't interpret it as a keepsake. Well, the general theory is that people seek to avoid the traumatic or things that remind them of the traumatic experience. Is that true? Objection asked and answered. The court says overruled. The witness says yes. Mr. Khan says, all right, so let's turn to the first symptom that falls within that cluster. The first one is how many of these 7 symptoms did you find to be present? Virtually all of them. Okay. The first one is efforts to avoid thoughts, feelings, or conversations associated with the trauma. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. And did you rely upon the representation of Erik Menendez that he desires to avoid thoughts, feelings, or conversations associated with the trauma? Yes. Is there some external sources that provided you with evidence that Erik Menendez sought to avoid feelings, thoughts, or conversations associated with the trauma? Well, the answer here would be the same as I gave a minute ago. I mean, there are the notes, for example, of Dr. Vickery's and others reflecting his difficulty and reticence in approaching the subject of his sexual molestation, that he was having a hard time with it. He was trying to stay away from it. But him and Lyle, I think Lyle had a worse time of it, but him and Lyle both wanted nothing to do with, bringing the stuff out. Lyle more so than Erik. When you say he was trying to stay away from it, he basically told all the claims of molestation, didn't he? Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Rephrase the question, says the court. Mr. Khan says, didn't he reveal in his interview with Dr. Vickery that he had been molested? Yes. Are you saying that he was avoiding thoughts because he said, well, I really didn't want to tell you, but listen up? Yes. Ms. Abramson says, objection, Your Honor, it's argumentative. The court says, overruled. Sorry for all the pauses. I'm so sick of this. My dogs go in and out, in and out, in and out all day. That's why I can't do lives, because I'm constantly getting up and taking them out. It's so annoying. Okay. We even had like a doggy door put in, but of course it's 90 degrees outside and we have the air on, so we can't like have the doggy door screen door open, which is where the doggy door is. So it's just super irritating because then I go to let one in, the other one wants to go out, and the other one came in. And then the other one's like, no, I want to go out. So it's just super annoying. So apologies. And I don't remember where I left off, but I know Ms. Abramson objected to that question and said there's no foundation. And the court says overruled, overruled. The answer will stand, which was, are you saying that he was avoiding thoughts because he said, well, I really didn't want to tell you, but listen up? And the witness answered yes. The witness says, I am not through finishing. The court says, go ahead. I love this witness. He says, okay, yes, because what's not significant is that eventually he told all the stories. It's the manner in which he revealed the stories, and it's a gradual revelation of the various types of sexual abuse that take place. And that's very consistent with having avoidance, having reticence, having reluctance, having difficulty talking about or dealing with the feelings or dealing with the thoughts associated with the trauma. He didn't just come out and blurt out everything. It took time before, in many sessions, many hours, I'm sure, for all of it to come out eventually. I gotta go let them in now. Hold on. Mr. Khan says, you're saying that just because a story is told over time, that is independent proof that the person doesn't want to tell the story. You're really being disingenuous, sir, because that's not at all what he said. It's not independent proof that the person doesn't want to tell the story. It's independent proof about the matter in which de facto the patient tells the story to the to the doctor. Right, says Mr. Khan. But can it also be, doctor, that a person tells the story all at once or over time because he wants to create the impression that this is really tough for him to talk about and it's going to take a long time to come out? Basically saying, like, if he knows it's supposed to take a long time, can he just purposely make it take a long time to come out? Ms. Abramson says, objection. My dog is barking really loud. I don't know. Hold on. Sorry. Objection calls for speculation overruled. Witness says, are you asking that hypothetically? Mr. Khan says, yes. Hypothetically, that's possible, says the witness. Okay. Hold on. Mr. Khan says, okay. Let's turn to the second feature or symptom under the persistent avoidance cluster, and that it's efforts to avoid activities, places, or people that arouse recollection of the trauma, and this refers to the general desire that someone would have to stay away from things or places or people that remind them of trauma. Is that correct? Correct. And so, Erik Menendez, did he tell you, I do my best to avoid all people and places that remind me of the trauma? Well, that's not the way he put it. But did he tell you something which caused you to conclude that he avoided activities, places, or people that might arouse recollections of the trauma? Yes, he did. And you relied upon his representations. Is that correct? Yes, I did. You're supposed to. Like, these questions of, trying to discredit it just because you relied on his word. That's so stupid. Of course, a therapist is going to, there's a personal relationship between the two. And yes, they talk and open up about things. That doesn't mean he's lying about everything. And he was like 19 at this time. I really doubt that he could have faked it this well. You know what I'm saying? Now, was there independent evidence that Erik Menendez wanted to avoid activities, places, or people that aroused recollections of the trauma? Yes. What was that independent evidence? Again, some of it I have already talked about. The disclosure about the sexuality with Noel Nedley and David Moravovich, whatever. Also, I think one of the most important pieces of information I got had to do with his telling Andy Cano about sexual activity with his father when Erik was about 12 and a half to 13, and asking Andy Cano not to tell, to keep it a secret. There was a revelation about it, and at the same time, an instruction to Andy Cano not to talk about it. And in fact, the information was that Andy Cano had indicated that to Mr. Menendez that he might be willing to talk to his mother about it because the question was whether or not this activity of massaging his penis was normal, and he was asking his cousin Andy about that, and Erik then told Andy not to tell. So, I mean, that's a clear illustration of avoiding it. Now, Doctor, he was doing just the opposite with Andy Cano. He was reporting the activity you are saying to Andy Cano. Is that correct? He is reporting it to him. So, how is reporting the activity? How does that satisfy the rule that you want to avoid activities, places, or people that arouse recollections of the trauma? Because if Andy were to tell and the secret would get out and the information would get out about this abuse, then he would have to confront the consequences. So his instructions not to tell is a clear example of avoidance. He didn't give him an okay to say, yeah, go ahead and tell your mom, find out if it's okay, if this is normal. Very good point. Dr. Wilson, if he really wanted to avoid getting this information out, he could avoid getting the information out by avoiding Andy and not telling Andy Cano in the first place. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative. Rephrase the question, says the court. Mr. Khan says, Doctor, the information could get out only because he told Andy Cano. Is that correct? Correct. Did it occur to you, Doctor, that if Erik Menendez really wanted to avoid activities, places, or people that arose recollections of the trauma, would he then not be inclined to tell Andy Cano at all? That's true. He could have not told him. And the fact that he told him would seem to suggest that he is doing just the opposite of this symptom. That is, he was creating a situation in which the information could be revealed. He is doing both. And that's the interesting thing, part about your question. He is doing both. On the one hand, he wants to know what's going on, whether or not this is normal. So he asks his cousin, does this happen? Is this a normal thing to get your penis massaged? And he then says, don't tell anybody about this. When Andy Cano says, well, I'll ask my mom. He says, don't talk about it. Don't tell. So there is the avoidance. You have both in that example. This witness is like, you're kind of an idiot. You have examples of him reporting it and also trying to avoid it. Well, that is evidence of avoidance to you. Is that correct? Oh, absolutely, it is. Okay. And you said that the conversations that Erik Menendez, the fact that Erik Menendez would have difficulty talking about sexual relations is independent evidence that he avoided activities, places, or people that aroused recollections of the trauma? Yes. Okay, but what he was avoiding was looking at what he was doing objectively, not simply avoiding conversations about the trauma. He was avoiding conversations about sexual relations in general. Is that correct? It's correct. But the reason he was avoiding those conversations about sexuality is because it stimulated recollections for him about what he had happening in terms of sexual molestation at home. But I am saying for you to reach that conclusion, you have to rely upon him, not the independent observations of Noel Nedley or David Moravovich. Is that correct? Yes. Well, let's turn then to the second symptom in the cluster. I think we're on the third, says the witness. Okay, the third, says Mr. Khan. Inability to recall an important aspect of the trauma. Now, this goes solely to the recollection of Erik Menendez. Is that correct? Yes. And so for this, you have to rely exclusively upon what Erik Menendez tells you. Is that correct? Yes, it is. Well, let's turn to the fourth symptom in this cluster, markedly diminished interest of participation in significant activities. Did you rely upon the presentation of Erik Menendez to find that this symptom was present? Yes, I did. And was there any independent evidence that that symptom was present? Again, the only independent evidence is the stuff I have been referring to before from David Moravovich. I don't know how you say that. Each time I think I'm saying it differently. And others that he didn't, he didn't socialize, didn't go to parties, wasn't interested in school activities, and that sort of stuff. He lost interest in everything. When you have depression and anxiety and other things on your mind and going on, you lose interest in a whole lot of things that you used to love. I myself, I tell you guys, I try to be a little open about my experiences as I guess I would have been a battered spouse. Although, I mean, he didn't really hit me. He was physical a couple times, but not to the point of like hitting. But it was mostly psychological, uh, emotional, very rude, insulting all the time, walking on eggshells. I was a wreck for those years that I was with him. Anyways, what was my point? Oh, I can tell you now, I like today I still don't enjoy things as much as I used to when I before all of the abuse before. Like I've told you, I'm kind of a shell of who I used to be. Like I'm still finding myself back again. It takes years. It's been 11 years since my divorce. It takes a long time. After abuse, after being in an abusive situation, and having your self-esteem torn down and feeling like you're lost and stuck and helpless and all the things that we talk about on this. They're lifelong scars that can last forever. Like that's why I say I almost feel like physical abuse is not as bad as like the emotional part, the psychological part, the tearing you down as a human being from the inside. That's the worst part for me. Those are the scars that last forever. Like I had bruises and stuff from things, whatever, but those all, bruises heal, wounds can heal. Not that I'm saying, abuse. Yeah, I don't condone any of it. I hate abusers. Period. Full stop. So that's why I talk about this because no. But anyways, that was my point. It's just that you become it takes a long time to get yourself back, is what I'm saying. And I'm still trying. Things that I used to love, I have very little interest in anymore. So it's sad. It's like I just don't have the passions like I used to. I feel almost jaded. It's hard to come back from that when you've been, torn down so badly. Continuing on. Next question. And people who do not go to the parties are not all suffering from PTSD, are they? Correct. And people who don't go to parties were not necessarily molested, were they? Correct. And you wouldn't diagnose a person as suffering from PTSD simply because or based on the fact that they don't go to parties or because they feel uncomfortable speaking about sexual matters, would you? No. You see what he's doing? Like he's picking apart every single little symptom or reason why you think that Erik has PTSD. And he's saying, well, that alone wouldn't do it, would it? Well, no, because you have to look at it all as a whole, you dummy. You can't just take pieces and say, oh, well, I guess he's not. I guess he doesn't have PTSD. That's not how it works. I don't like this prosecutor or the judge. All right. Let's turn to the fifth symptom in this cluster, feeling of detachment or estrangement from others. Did Erik Menendez indicate to you that he felt detached or estranged from others? Yes. How did he express? In what context was that? Or was that representation made? How was it made? Yes. He described to me that he always felt like he was isolated. He was a loner. That it was hard to feel close to people, including obviously in the context of his family, to feel close to his mother and his father. He did have some attachment and admiration, of course, for his older brother Lyle, but he indicated to me that he really didn't ever feel a deep attachment and closeness to relations. That there was always this sense of having to maintain a family secret and what was going on in his life and not being able to be open and connected in a way that was easy and comfortable with other people, including his own family members. Was there independent evidence of the presence of his symptom aside from the representations of the defendant? Hmm. And what is that you're referring to? Yes, that's information from coaches and also from family members that they would describe Erik as isolated and withdrawn. One characterization, I'm sorry, I forget the exact source, but I could find it, described that he, hands down behavior, didn't interact with others. Another one I recall now is the testimony of Chuck Wadlington, who said over a period of 5 years that he didn't recall him having any friends or relationships. That Eric's activities were really limited to the tennis and the coaching. That's another kind of example. All right. Would you give a person a diagnosis of post traumatic stress disorder because he is isolated and withdrawn? In and of itself, no. The sixth symptom in this category is restricted range of effect, of affect, is like your affect. For example, unable to have loving feelings. Did you find that this was true for Erik? Yes. Did you find that he was unable to have those feelings? No, I didn't find that he was unable to have loving feelings. What was the restricted range of affect that you found to be true? The restricted range of affect in terms of the history was a general emotional construction, a lack of manifestation of emotions in terms of other behavior with the people he was interacting with, teachers and coaches and others that he checked himself. It was a sign of weakness. As Mr. Erik Menendez told me, it was a sign of weakness to show emotions, and that was something that he drilled into him, that Jose drilled into him. Also, this was verified by an external source, in particular, again, Chuck Wadlington, the person who coached Erik for about 5 years, said that in that whole period of time, he was not verbally demonstrative about his feelings. Now, that's an external observation over many, many trials, over many repeated situations, over many episodes of tennis and coaching and observation and interaction. And that's a kind of external verification that I found very impressive. That's also consistent with depression, isn't it? Asked Mr. Khan. You bet. Is isolated and withdrawn behavior also consistent with depression? It sure is. And in and of itself, it does not prove that the person is suffering from post traumatic stress disorder. In and of itself, it doesn't. You're right. And it doesn't prove that the person was molested, does it? No. And Dr. Vickery's notes reflecting that defendant was sad and was consistent with depression, is that correct? Indeed, it is. Let's turn to the last symptom, sense of a foreshortened future. For example, does not expect to have a career, marriage, children, or normal lifespan. This is one that takes on particular significance for someone who is standing trial on a capital offense. Is this correct? Sure. Now, other than these two clusters, the persistent re-experience cluster and the avoidance cluster, there is one final cluster which deals with symptoms of increased arousal. Is that correct? Yes. And these symptoms reflect the effects that post-traumatic stress disorder would have would have upon a person. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. Does the court wish to take a break now, Your Honor? The court says, okay, we will take our recess until 1:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We will resume at 1:30. And that is where we're going to end today. So we will continue on. I think Dr. Wilson's on. Yes. So we're going to have lunch break, a little bit more cross, and then redirect examination will begin in the next episode. So we're almost done with Dr. Wilson. I don't remember who's next. I'll have to give you an update next time. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. That's the end of this Trial Transcripts Exposed. Thanks for following along with me. Like if you want more, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. See you next time.